this video, I'm going to tell you what inclusive education is and what it is not. I'm also going to share with you 9 key features of inclusive education. So welcome to this video. My name's Leanne and I'm from Inclusive Education Planning. So at Inclusive Education Planning, I work with schools and with teachers and with parents to support the inclusion of students with disability. I'm going to share with you 4 structures within education. One of these is inclusive education. But to understand what inclusive education is, you need to understand what it is not. And after that, I will share with you 9 key features of inclusive education. So segregation. So segregation is very common within Australian education. And so that's where students with disabilities are removed from regular education and they're placed in separate environments. So special schools, special classes, disability units, behaviour units. We can also class schools and classes for gifted students as segregated education and ESL classes as well. And so you can see in the diagram where we have the non-disabled students are the students within the green circle and they are coloured blue. And so they are grouped together within regular education. But students with disabilities or other students are segregated. So they are in the black circle and they are away from regular education. And often when students with disability are segregated, they are often not educated with their same age peers. So integration is often confused with inclusion. So for the most part within Australia, we have students with disabilities who are integrated rather than included. So that is where students with disabilities are placed in schools with their similar age peers, but things have not changed. There are no limited accommodations for them. So the physical environment may not change, the pedagogy remains unchanged, and the most important feature of inclusive education is the school culture. So the school culture refers to the language, the behaviours, the knowledge that a certain group adheres to. And the school culture for an inclusive setting needs to be based on social justice. But if that school culture remains unchanged, it cannot be classed as inclusive education. So integration limits a student's ability to fully access or participate in learning, and it's not a step towards inclusion. And you can see in the diagram here, we have the non-disabled students in blue and students with disabilities are the coloured circles, and they're within the regular classroom, but they're still kept separate. They're in their own little circle there. So they're not being involved, they're not being welcomed, they're not being valued, they're not making those social connections. And that's really important for them to have those social connections. The next one is exclusion. So exclusion is where students are directly or indirectly prevented from or denied access to education in any form. And where I live in Adelaide, in South Australia, there are a large number of families who homeschool children with disabilities because they feel that their child does not fit into school very well and they are not receiving the accommodations that they need or the supports that they need. So inclusive education, and that is when all students, regardless of their ability, regardless of whether they have a severe intellectual disability or severe multiple disabilities. So regardless of their ability, they're placed in age-appropriate general education classes in schools in their own neighbourhood. So they're welcome to enrol in their school in their own neighbourhood. So they're not catching a bus for an hour to go to a special school or a segregated setting. So they can enrol in their own neighbourhood and they receive high quality instruction, interventions and supports that enable them to be successful in the classroom. And you can see here the students with disabilities, the orange, pink and grey, they are just within in the classroom, mixing, socialising in with the students without disability. And it's very important. And inclusive education is a human right. And one of the cultural aspects of inclusive education is where disability and diversity is celebrated and welcomed. So the features of inclusive education, what does it all mean? Because it's one of the most contested terms within education. There are great debates about what inclusive education is. So here are some features. Strong leadership. So it starts at the top, doesn't it? So students with disabilities thrive in schools where the leadership ensures they are valued and disability is viewed as a natural part of human diversity. So just like some people have brown hair, some people have blonde hair, some people have black hair, some people have disabilities and some people don't. Natural proportions, and this is a key factor. So students with disabilities should be spread out in natural proportions rather than clustered together. So natural proportions as in society. So if we look at the proportion of people in society with a disability, that should be replicated within classrooms so that we don't place large numbers of students with very high needs in the one class. So just because you have a whole lot of teachers and one happens to have a degree in special education who's working in regular education doesn't mean that they should have 10 children with severe multiple disabilities in their class. In fact, we need to look at natural proportions and reduce that right back so that the children with high needs, there is only one, maybe two at the most in each classroom, so that all those natural processes of friendships and connections can grow and build in the classroom. So under the idea of natural proportions, we avoid grouping by the category of disability. And that means where educators remove children who have an intellectual disability from the class and group them in some way for literacy or for numeracy. And that can even be within the class. If we round up the children and take them away from all the other children and teach them in a corner of the classroom separately, that is still segregated education. So we need to avoid grouping by the category of disability and use pedagogical strategies like cooperative learning is a highly structured form of group work that is quite effective in inclusive classrooms. Assistance. So number 3, teaching assistance. So support for students with disabilities need to come from teachers rather than assistants. We need to move away from one-to-one support. The research is very clear that students with disabilities can become dependent on their assistants, and that when we place an assistant beside a student with a disability in the classroom, that they can actually regress. And the assistant can avoid the student having interaction with the teacher. And it's not very effective when we've got the student with the highest needs in the classroom having the least amount of contact with the teacher. So assistants should be spread throughout the classroom. Assistants play a very, very important role. So I'm not minimising their role at all. They play a very important role, but this needs to come from the top, where leadership look at the research regarding assistants and how to achieve the best outcomes for students with a disability. And that means not relying on assistants to do the teaching, because that's only a recent phenomenon that we have assistants doing direct teaching. And I've heard stories of assistants developing their own lesson plans and writing their own program without any oversight from teachers, which I find quite alarming. So that shouldn't be occurring at all. It should be teachers developing the program, leading the program, and directing assistants who should be spread throughout the classroom, helping everyone. The only time we would have one-to-one support for a student is if they have high medical needs, such as something like epilepsy, where it's quite severe and they need to be watched at all times, or behavioural issues that are so extreme that other people could be hurt, and so therefore the student needs one-to-one. So one-to-one support is we only use it if it is absolutely necessary. Otherwise, spread that support throughout the classroom. So other things, planning time. Number 4 is planning time. All teachers should have ample co-planning time to ensure students with disabilities have adequate and appropriate support. So that might be regular classroom teachers having planning time with special educators or inclusive educators, and to develop some co-teaching plans. It might also be with the assistant. So the assistant knows what's happening. So they're kept in the loop, because often assistants don't find out until they actually turn up for the day at work. So there's very little planning time for assistants. So wherever possible, build in that planning time so that teaching can be as effective as possible. Number 5, portable services. So services for students with disabilities should be portable and delivered in the context of the general education classroom. So services should be taken to the student rather than the student removed and taken to, for literacy instruction or mathematical instruction or speech pathology. As far as possible, that should be delivered in the context of the general education classroom. And most of those services are portable. There are very few services that are not portable, unless a student is using large equipment, possibly a standing frame. But even standing frames can be incorporated into a general education classroom as long as there's enough space. Things like hydrotherapy, obviously, are the sort of things that students would be withdrawn from and have to go to the pool, because you cannot put a pool in a classroom, as nice as it would be. The student would have to go to the pool. But for everything else, and the majority, I would say 99% of things are portable and can be taken to the classroom where the student is, so that they are seen as being part of the classroom. That's really important. So students that are withdrawn all the time are not considered to be a member of the classroom. So membership and being a valued member is very, very important. Number 6, specialist teachers. So specialist teachers in special and inclusive education should be supporting teachers in general education. Whilst all teachers are qualified to teach all children, teachers in general education haven't had that extra postgraduate degree in special education. So whilst they are qualified to teach students with disabilities, they may just need some extra support and some ideas around strategies to support students with disabilities and the accommodations that they need. Number 7, presume competence, and that is a key part of inclusive education. So receiving an inclusive education and being placed in an inclusive education classroom does not rely on a psychological assessment. So there are no prerequisites for inclusive education. Every child, every student with a disability has the human right to have inclusive education, regardless of their level of ability, regardless of whether they have a severe intellectual disability. So presuming competence, we assume that every student can learn without requiring evidence of their capacity. There are no prerequisite skills at all for inclusive education. Number 8, collaboration. So collaboration is really important. We should have a partnership based on mutual commitment, trust and respect with the student. So the student should be the centre of all of this, and the student should have a voice in this whole process, and with the family and guardians. So it should be a partnership with all the key stakeholders involved with the student and their education. Friendships, number 9, friendships are really important. So we need to activate students as learning resources for one another to foster friendships and connections and avoid micro exclusions in the classroom. So activating students as learning resources for one another is really important. So students learn from the social environment in the classroom, and that's really important. What that does not mean is placing a student without a disability with a student with a disability, and the student without a disability taking the lead and telling the student with a disability what to do and being the instructor. Wherever possible, try to have equal status relationships. That's really important because disability is easily stigmatized. So it's really important that there are equal status relationships within the classroom. And in doing group work, it's really important to structure into the lesson plans ways that students with disabilities can show their knowledge, show their skills, and their expertise. And that's really important. And that can be by carefully examining a student using a strength-based lens and building into the curriculum things that they enjoy, things that they are good at, and allowing them to shine in that area.